Good morning. They reminded me I had 20 minutes when I walked out here, and I said, hell, with my accent, I can't ask about your wife and family in 20 minutes. So we're going to do the best we can to get this going. So we're going to talk about no man's land, where growing companies fail. Or it used to be, the first title was, what do you do if your company's too big to be small, too small to be big? But I'm also going to throw in some anecdotes about the new normal, because I think there's some things going on in the business world today that are unique, and we're going to talk about that. So let's see if I got this thing going. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is that those of you that are scaling your business are in very, very rare company. I had the privilege when I wrote this book to get Dr. David Birch out of retirement, an applied mathematician at MIT. This database cost $4 or $5 million. It's up at the University of Wisconsin, and we track every business in the United States for 20 years, including yours. So we have some data on you. First thing I want you to look, now it takes a while for us to get this compiled, so we're always a year or two behind. First thing I want you to look at is no man's land are those companies, which I think many of you represent, from around 20 employees, call it $7.5 to $8 million to $50 million in revenues. You can take the number of employees by $250,000 and get the revenues. But I want you to look at how few companies there are in the United States above 100 employees, and how few companies there are above 250 employees. 31,000 companies in the United States out of 13 million. We got rid of all the not-for-profits, et cetera. And they are decreasing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing I want you to understand is that there is an inflection point, and it is very dangerous. I called it no man's land, and I'm going to give you a brief, rapid-fire description under my 20-minute timetable of what you're going to go through when you scale. Now, I also was reminded I'm supposed to have a personal anecdote to start this off. So I was trying to think of something. I'm not that interesting, but I had some buddies of mine that are idiots talk me into starting jujitsu. Has anybody ever done that before? Okay. Do you roll? Yeah, so, it's not a thing you do at my age to start with. So I remember walking out of the gym, and this little old lady came up and asked me if she could help me get to the car. And I said, is it that obvious? And she says, son, you're walking like a newborn baby giraffe. And I said, all right, we got a problem here. So the bottom line is sometimes the obvious is the most important thing to state up front. And one of the things I want to remind you is it's absolutely legal, ethical, and good business to stay small and make money. I wrote this book as chairman CEO of a firm that had 30 offices, 1,400 employees, a couple $100 million of revenues. We sold it to a public company, used that to get your attention. The reality of it is, the obvious thing for you to think about strategically is there needs to be a compelling reason to grow. And there are compelling reasons to grow. But you need to think about it strategically. Is that fair? Okay, is that a personal anecdote? Did I do the thing okay? All right, good deal. All right, now, that's proof that it is very rare to get through those yellow bands. Dr. Birch, I think, created some data that prove that. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the transition from being too big to be small, too small to be big, some of the danger issues, and then talk to you about some of the anecdotes. And we're going to go at this really quickly. First of all, we're going to do the 4 M's, the market, the management, the model, and the money, because I think you could diagnose your transition around those 4 M's regardless of your industry. This is a picture of innovation. It's a picture of somebody messing something up and somebody cleaning something up. I did a speech at the Broadmoor years ago to the heads of R&D for the Fortune 1000. I did not think who they were until a week before I was to speak. I tried to talk my way out of it. I said, I don't think I'm going to fit. So if you're going to go down big. And I stood in front of all the Fortune 1000 R&Ds, not all of them, but hundreds of them, and said, you can't innovate because you can't do this, and this is how entrepreneurs innovate. And you know what it is? Your customers come up to you, your clients come up to you, they ask you to do something and ask if you're good at it, and you look at them deeply into their eyes and say, yeah, I'm an expert at it, and you're lying about it. So you make these promises, but because you control both the promises and the operations, right? You make those promises happen. That's the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's very difficult for a large company to do that. Very difficult, right? Nobody has the authority to do that, all right? Very few. So the bottom line is that in the market today, and I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about that. In the market today, the single biggest issue that you guys are facing is shorter product cycles, okay? It is remarkable what you are doing now as a value proposition, because remember those promises that you made, that you delivered? You have a collection of those in your business. Some of them are scalable, some of them are not. That's called a value proposition. Best way to explain it is I had a guy come out of the audience one time, and he said, tell me real quickly, what do you do? And he said, I'm a trade used aircraft auto parts. And I go, all right, so what are you good at? And he says, what do you mean? I said, what are you good at? He says, I'm good at buying right. I said, so really what you're doing is you're out there with the customers, you know what they want, they delegate or subcontract you buying right, and you flip, you're a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R, right? So initially, in the early stages of your business, you've got to get the business good at what you're good at. You've got to look at that value proposition, and can that value proposition survive without your personal engagement? If it can't, you need to stay smaller at human scale. Does that make common sense? Okay, good. Now, it's interesting, a colleague of mine, and this is mostly Inc. 5000 companies, I thought you'd find this interesting. Those of us running businesses believe that our inner team, our management team understands our value proposition. If you actually test that notion, 7% of the leadership teams actually can agree to a common value proposition. Now I'm going to flip to the management. And again, I'm sorry for the accent, but I got to pop through this. This is the most emotionally difficult transition that any of you will ever face. The bottom line is you start these businesses probably because you can't work for somebody else, or you got fired and stole somebody's customers, How many of y'all did that? Got fired and turn the camera that way, okay? But the reality of it is you have an inner circle. And Bo was the one that actually sparked me to start thinking about this. The most persuasive influence you have is who is in the office when the big decisions are made. Every one of your employees knows who your inner circle is. Go ask them. It's remarkable. I had 30 offices. I had newsletters. I had national partner meetings that cost me $2 million. Everything I do to get everybody in alignment, the thing that everybody watched was who was in my inner circle and who I kicked in or who I brought in. Now, the ticket to the inner circle early on is real simple. It's loyalty, right? These are people that, we talked about earlier. These people put their body on the road for us. Now, what's interesting, if you're going to go to the next level, with very few exceptions, the ticket to the inner circle changes. And the ticket to the inner circle goes from loyalty to performance. How many of you have ever been in an organization where the folks in the inner circle are there because of just loyalty? It's a disastrous culture, right? Now, that's a tough one. If I ruin your afternoon, somebody might at the office be willing to hope that somebody is telling you as the leader, and only you can do it, is that somebody is in your inner circle because of loyalty and they're not performing and they can't do anything about it, and they know who it is, everybody knows who it is, and it's up to you to make that change. And it is brutally difficult. How do you look somebody in the eye and say, I couldn't get here without you, but I can't get there with you? And what do? We give everybody titles when we can't pay them enough in the old days, right? You're our CFO. No, you're really kind of an assistant controller, but you're the chief financial officer. Then when you're the CFO, you go, oh my gosh. Well, try taking that currency away. It doesn't work. You got to hire at the top, into the inner circle, not in the middle, to get to the next level. Look at that. 20% of our own people agree that we're holding everybody accountable. Now, a new normal, we talked about shortened product cycles. I swear to you, as I'm sitting here, I sat in front, the first day I taught college up at Nashville, and I wrote 2 definitions of profits. Profit ultimately represents the amount that a customer knowingly provides the company for the value they have received above that company's cost. Profit 2 ultimately represents the amount that a company receives above its cost structure to the disadvantage of its customers without their knowledge. Pretty damn good, isn't it? I'm up there with a bunch of college kids. That's all the people in that class at a major university that picked number 2 when I asked them which they believe most accurately represents what y'all do. Can you believe that? And then I did a study outside of that in the general population. 67% of people view profits negatively. When you're talking about, it's hard enough to find a value proposition. It's hard enough to get the right people in your inner circle and deal with that transition. But now you got to get everybody to understand that making a profit is the applause from your customers, not taking advantage of them. Model. Economic model of a company. Where does it scale financially? One of the single most, well, let me back up here. One of the single most important issues that you're going to face, and I'll talk about in the last M, is there is enormous amounts of low-cost capital out there. And the model is where you actually profit, and you're going to find that there's places where we call dead zones and there's step fixed costs. How many of you ever felt like you had to bet the companies on getting the revenue up, but you had to build the infrastructure in advance of that, right? That's very common. And I'll show you some step fixed costs. I'll show you that in that model. But the first thing I want you to know is that while you're here, there's a little scheme going on. Some of your employees are getting back and they're going, okay, Jack's off some conference, we're running overtime, we're redlining, we need more people. So let's put a case together for him to hire 6. We only need 3, but let's go hit him. It's a conspiracy. So when you get back to the office, honest goodness, when you get back to the office, they're going to hit you up and they're going to say da 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 da. And then here's what you do. You go, well, yeah, but if we do this, and if I adjust the promise for that customer to this, if we do that, we'll only need 3. And they go, God, you are brilliant. And then you hire 3 like that, right? Now change the discussion. Literally change the discussion. You walk in there, and they go, we need you to borrow $750,000. And you go, that dog ain't going to hunt. You kidding me? I got to pay that money back. Where am I going to get the cost savings? I've got to outperform the interest rate. Well, take a look at this. If you borrow $300,000, the salary monthly equivalent of that is $56,000. Now, $56,000 all-in employee, for those of you in California, that's a $35,000 employee. Those of you in Georgia, it's a $40,000. That is not an expensive employee, right? Think about it. You'll drop the hat and make a decision to hire someone. Well, I can get rid of them. Oh, yeah. That's really hard. People find work. So one of the most interesting things that you need to think about in terms of this is there's step fixed cost. There are people, the human capital is the most expensive capital there is in the world today. And large companies, if you go look at my data, they have been shedding employees for the last decade because they know if I have a choice between equipment and people, equipment is a done deal. Okay? When you're in this in-between stage, you're kind of going from third grade soccer to everybody playing, ringing out performance, processes. You've got to find out what your value proposition is to get to do that. Then you can automate. It's very difficult, and you'd be concerned of this. This is the freight forwarding industry. Every company in the United States, 5 years average, nobody makes any money from 20 to 50 million bucks. That's because when you get out of one port, you have to lay an infrastructure in to compete with FedEx and UPS, who are in multiple ports. Very simple. So know where you are. Don't grow yourself into that chasm. Obviously, that's obvious. The model navigation rule is you got to know that you're going to make more money to get bigger. I was in a group of a dozen CEOs, companies from $50 to $150 million yesterday. My job was to tear their business ideas apart, which is kind of fun. But there's this one woman, brilliant entrepreneur. She was on the smaller stage, right in the middle of no man's land, 20 million bucks. When I started walking through the financial model, I am absolutely convinced that based on her cost of customer acquisition for a segment, that at 22 million, she made 2 million. At 15 million, she'd make 4 million. Think about that. And I'm not kidding you. Understand where you get leverage in your model and make sure you don't grow for the growth alone. It's obvious. Now, here's the interesting thing. Money, the capital markets, I was a global chairman for ACG, which kind of represents the private equity industry. I know that world. Capital markets are one of the great things we have in this country. The first thing, I love the mission of this group, that if you take institutional investors on equity, you will be selling your business. That's the business they're in. They have to sell you to get their returns back. But the reality of it is, think about your business in terms of how do I reduce risk? Because if you reduce risk, you increase the value and you also attract capital. And that is a very interesting question to ask your own management team. Think about it. You walk in. Tell me what you believe the top 3 risks in this company are. And by the way, they're all gossiping about it. And it's usually not as bad as, we tend to, as entrepreneur, owner, operators, we kind of hide that from everybody. We got big shoulders. We don't want anybody, they don't want to know, we don't want them to know how close they are or how risky the business is. Well, they know. Bring them into that discussion, and you guys are unbelievably creative at getting rid of risk. That's a really interesting business objective. Now, this is we update this through 18 here pretty soon, but I wanted to look at that. That's billions of dollars. There's 1,200 investors out there with hundreds of billions of dollars. They have a gun to their head. They have to deploy that capital, okay? And the only way and 7, 8, 9 years ago when I started looking at this data, I went to my private equity company. I said, you guys can't find platforms, okay? What are you going to do with all this money? I said, I suspect that what you're going to do is do add-on investments. And that's the new normal. The new normal in the capital markets in the United States today is it is cheaper to buy a customer than it is to win one the old-fashioned way. How many of y'all have private equities rolling up your industry? Raise your hands. All right, raise them high. All right, look around, guys. Too much capital and extraordinarily inexpensive, cheap capital drives a paradigm that you have to think about. That's part of the new normal. You got a cultural issue in management about what we do, defending, adding value to customers. You have shortened product cycles, which means you got to kind of bet your company on a new product. And there's too much money chasing too few deals. And the key for you to stay independent and out of that is to lower the risk of your business. And that's where we are. No man's land is real. If we had a little more than our 20 minutes, I could give you all sorts of anecdotes about that. Think about it in terms of the 4 M's, and also think about this new normal. You are gifted and important to this country. I've got data that indicates that almost all the net jobs are grown by companies transitioning no man's land. It's not small companies, and it's definitely not large companies. And it's been a pleasure and a privilege to talk with you, and hopefully it was useful. Thanks.